All right, I am here with Shari, and we are going to kind of continue our talk about the U-shaped journey. And specifically, we're going to talk about, I mean, it's a U, so the downhill portion of it. And Jonathan Pajot had made a video, or he had talked about recently about the left hand of God, the left and right hand of God. And the left hand is the hand that casts away and pushes away. I guess I should use my left hand.
Well, I like the words he uses. He says the centrifugal and the how do you say it?
Centrifugal.
Centrifugal and centripetal or centripetal. There we go.
Oh, centrifugal and centripetal.
Yeah.
That's what I have. Is
right.
that right?
Yeah. So the centrifugal force is the one that pushes out, and the centripetal force is the one that draws in. Mm-hmm. I like those because I imagine, when you're a kid on the merry-go-round and you can feel that centrifugal force, right?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what I imagine, that if God is dynamic, and like Luke talks about the spiral dynamic, right? This motion, then you have to have these forces, right? At play.
Right. Yeah. And so what's interesting about all of that is because I guess a common thing would be like, well, isn't it bad that God would like push you away? Mm-hmm. And isn't it good when God draws you close towards him? Yeah. And so we think any time that God is distant, we're like, oh, this is not good. And sometimes it's not. And then anytime we're being drawn close, we're like, this is how things are always supposed to be. But I think, maybe I'll just give a couple examples. Well, I used the one example, I think, in our last video, which is the father pushing his son on the bicycle.
Right.
Now this is, there's a point in which, the son's learning to ride the bike and the father's holding on and letting the son kind of learn how to pedal, and, and the father's grip kind of gets looser and looser and allows the son to control the bike more and more. And eventually the father lets go. And we wouldn't see that as evil or bad in itself. If the son takes a spill or something, that's unfortunate. But what's the father's heart in that situation? The father's heart is that the son will learn to ride. And I think with all this sort of left hand of God stuff we talk about, and especially when we, I do want to get into the book of Job about this, because it takes this sort of deadly serious, that's a little more extreme than just riding a bike. Like what is God doing when he's pushing us away or allowing us to go out? And, I think fundamentally it's that God loves us and wants us to become something and become more like him, really.
Yeah. I wanted to say one thing, because just to make that example that you used about the bicycle more profound than it sounds, unless the father lets go of the bicycle, the child cannot conform to the image of the bicycle.
Right.
And I mean, the bicycle is such a great example, because when you ride a bicycle, you actually become the bicycle. Like there's so many things going on, and that's why a bicycle is so daunting when you first look at it, because you have to balance it, you have to pedal it, you have to steer it, you have to brake it, you have to, and yet at some point you can do all that without thinking. And that only happens because you conform to the image of you become the bicycle, right?
You're embodying it.
Yeah, well, you actually conform. to the image of it, it's kind of like the example of the cup and grasping the cup, right? Like the hand moves towards it and conforms to the image of the cup, because without thinking, right? It just automatically conforms. And I think that is how conforming to the image of Christ works. It works like that, to me anyway. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
That's good. So okay, so but we don't as the child in this, it's not necessarily all like rainbows and butterflies because we're actually let go of, and then we have to do something like it depends on us. And I think, I think about my past self, and this kind of, when I was like a teenager, this idea kind of, I didn't like it at all. I like, that's evil. Like, that's not God. God wouldn't just abandon me. Like, that's how I imagined it. And that's kind of how it feels. You're this didn't happen to me, but you can imagine, well, I can imagine my youngest son doing this, but this never happened. But if I let him go on the bike and he took a spill, he would have turned back at me and been like, why did you let go? And then like cry, and then like
it would be your fault.
Right. It's my fault.
You would actually take that, right? You would take that on. You would.
It would be my fault. And I'd be like, yeah, I'm sorry.
I let go too soon, like
right.
And even if, a good father, let's say, you better be a good one.
I try.
A good father, even if he knew that his child could do it and fell only because of a lack of confidence in himself, would still take that on, would still say, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it again. I won't let go this time. I shouldn't have let you go. Right.
Right. And I think God does that. Like, there'll be times where we're like, I can't handle this. And God's like, all right.
Yeah.
And he's like, you don't have to.
No.
Right. And often, like, we will, this is where we're like, oh, I'm so terrible. I'm so horrible. Like, why did I do that? I wasn't good enough. And really, like, I just try to remember, like, what's the Father's heart? The Father's heart is like, it's like, no. I love you. Like, that your success or failure on that has nothing to do with my love, but I'm trying to push you out so that you grow.
Yeah. Well, you could actually, play on that example of the bicycle in this way. You could do another analogy of a child at the breast. Okay. So you have this centrifugal force, right? Centripetal force that draws the child in close. But over time, that force becomes centrifugal, right? And there would be nothing more disturbing than to see a grown man at his mother's breast.
Right.
Like, seriously, for a whole pile of reasons.
Yeah.
And it would be wrong on his part, but it would also be wrong on her part to let that happen. Okay. So this centrifugal force is necessary for the child to become the man, or the woman, right? And so you could look at it, from that perspective too.
Yeah. And we could, like, just even like the guy who never left home, and his parents just let him live at home through his 20s. And then he never left in his 30s. And now he's 40 something and never left. And that's not good.
No.
And it's like you see this all the time in nature. Nature's good about the bird the mama bird kicks the baby bird out of the nest, just like, you're gone, get out of here.
Yeah.
Or the, so okay, so let's ramp up the stakes a little bit.
I'm getting nervous now.
I don't necessarily have like a good example, but let's I'm nervous about this too, because the thing is, you don't want to try to justify evil
right,
by some sort of like, I don't, you like the father who abuses his son. Okay, now the father's not just trying to make his son grow. The father's abusing the son or the daughter. And a lot of times, like, or at least in the movies, the father's like, this is for your own good. He's trying, like, in his own warped way, maybe he sees that he's doing some sort of good by whooping his son's ass because he deserved it, and like, he shouldn't be that way, and like, or shouldn't, like, whatever. He's just like, and I'm thinking of one person.
What that actually does is it inhibits the growth of the son, right? It's a way of making the person, controlling the person, so that they never actually exceed you in their own journey.
Right.
You see, that's the deal. And the idea that it's for your own good, I think, is a projection, because it's often what the person perpetrating the violence really needed for the, or thinks of themselves, let's say it that way.
Right.
They, it's not you they're beating up, but themselves, in a sense, right? So, and because they feel so small, they have to keep you there too, because otherwise the contrast gets too obvious and they can't.
Right.
Anyway, that's me being a psychoanalyst, but
no,
but I think that's what that is.
That's true. It's inhibited. Yeah. Like, it's counterproductive to it is. In all sorts of ways. Like, that's why it's abuse.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
And
but we're talking about a healthy, like in these examples that we gave, a healthy parental parent-child relationships. That's what we're talking about.
Right. So like, there's this guy, David Goggins. David Goggins, right? He was on Joe Rogan a bunch. He's like an ultra marathon runner. He was a Navy SEAL. Like, he's one of the most like basically his Instagram is him without his shirt on, and he's just ripped, and he's just running like 100 miles at a time, and he's like, stay hard, and like, he's so tough.
Yeah.
But like, when he was in his early 20s or mid 20s, he was like very overweight, very lazy, like, was just kind of unmotivated or whatever, and he talks about being severely abused by his father. But he's somehow that led him down into his depression and into his, like, he's like overweight and unhappy and miserable and unmotivated, and all of a sudden something flipped, and he's so disciplined now, and he's so like he talks about like running through injuries. Like, he had 2 fractured legs, and he was running this ultra marathon that was 100 miles, and his legs were fractured, and he was at like 80 miles, and then he ran the last 20 miles on broken legs. And so, you see some, and this is where it's like, I don't know if I'm assuming too much, but like, he talks about how, like, nothing could get as bad as it was when he was a kid, so he can do anything. Like,
well, sometimes I think, I don't know, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah,
where he was before he got to where he is now was like being dead, right?
mm-hmm.
And now he's alive. And
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes a matter of life and death when someone has gone down so far down in the U-shaped journey, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
right? So far down to the bottom that they've actually experienced death. Well, I mean, that is, to me, that is the significance of the U-shaped journey, because what it does is it makes the resurrection that much more tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the metanoia takes place because you can't even entertain the idea of going back, because it means death.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know this from the struggles that I have with my mental health, because when I was at the bottom, what happened to me was I tried to kill myself. I literally tried to commit suicide,
mm-hmm.
right? And so now I don't play around with my mental health. I don't let it get too far. I don't say I'm okay when I'm not. I don't do any of that. Like, I stay hard in a sense, right? Because for me, it's a matter of life and death. Like, I have to see the slightest change in my behavior or my thoughts or my feelings,
Right.
and recognize it and call it out and move away from it, right? Otherwise, I could very well find myself in a very precarious situation, right?
Right.
So, and I think that's a good example of what the U-shaped journey accomplishes in a person, right?
Right. So the reason why I brought that up is because, like, you could be like, look at David Goggins now, look at the man he is and the things he's able to do and overcome. And he's like an inspirational guy, like inspiring all kinds of people to, to push past, like, to not give in when things get tough. He really is like a pretty amazing guy. But what you can't do is you can't justify what happened to him when he was a kid. You can't justify his father's actions,
right?
Because of it.
No.
And so, like, this is the danger that I mentioned that I'm trying to avoid. Like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be like, oh, I guess it's good to abuse a kid, because look at what could happen.
Right.
That
doesn't happen in every case, right?
Right. Sometimes they die.
Yeah.
And most of the time, like, David Goggins is the exception almost. And but so I a long while ago I talked with Jeff about this, and he brought up, I think it's a C.S. Lewis thing, talks about good and evil, and then it talks about how these are actually wrapped up in a more complex good that's happening at a different level. And so, like, in the David Goggins example with his abuse, it's not like the abuse was good or can be justified in any sense. It was meaningless, and it was evil.
Yeah.
But he is able to be, and this is what people can do. This is the potential that they have, is to turn that into good.
Right.
Which he did, and which he does.
So, quick question, because you've been sharing some of the book you're reading, the Ethics of Beauty, right? I always want to call it the beauty of ethics.
Maybe it should be.
And you talked about a thing called, I think it's called moral luck, right? Do you think that fits into what you're talking about here? Like, the good, you've got the good and evil wrapped up in the great, in the well, I don't want to say greater good, I don't like that term, but in it, and so you have this like roll of the dice going on in a sense, right?
Yep. Yeah, because you could have been, I was born to a good family in Idaho, and that I don't have any control over that. I
Yeah.
I haven't had too much tragedy in my life. I haven't had anyone really close to me pass away. Like, by all accounts, like, I've lived, kind of a charmed life in a sense. And then there's other people who they're just born into a
Oh,
crappy
yeah.
family. Like, there's kids in my son's classes where I'm just, you just know, you can see it, that they're getting abused at home, or they just have terrible parents that are
Yeah.
and I got friends that work in social work and in mental health, and the stories that they tell, just stuff happening just in our city.
Yeah.
It's and yeah, and the thing with moral luck is, it's not your fault.
Right.
Like, you can't blame the kid, but the kid is also now has all sorts of problems, and now they're a problem as they get older. And he talks about how there's a sense in which, if we're trying to figure out who's at fault in these situations, like the kids, like, I think you could basically say the kid's not at fault. God won't hold them guilty, but in order for them to get out of their mess, they have to basically take responsibility for all the stuff that's going on inside them and around them.
And what if, let's just do the thought experiment. What if you went back into the life of the abusive parent of that child, and found out that it's actually not their fault either?
No, it's a chain.
And then you just go, oh, yeah, right?
Right.
So, like, and then we want to assign blame, which is, a form of justice, I guess, right? Like,
Yep.
it's the way that we mete out justice is to find someone to blame something on, and then they have to pay for it in whatever way we deem necessary. But if you're looking at it from the transcendent perspective, it looks much different, right? Like, if you're God, let's say, and you're looking down on all this, there is, like, yeah, it's difficult. And I want to say something like, no, I won't say it. I'll just.
It's hard to talk about this stuff.
It's really hard.
But
it's really hard to
like you hit on something important in the ethics of beauty. He talks about it's beauty, then goodness, then truth. And in the West, we have that flipped. So we like to go truth, then goodness, and then maybe get to beauty. And goodness is the one where we're trying to decide what's right and what's wrong. That's where we're trying to assign blame, and when we're trying to figure out who needs to be punished. And what he's saying, like there's times and places for that, but we need to look at the beautiful first. So in terms of, like, he starts the book talking about trauma, and so hopefully this will kind of make sense with how we're framing this. Like, a more, like, we kind of have a truth first approach in our American psychotherapy. So we're trying to get people to talk about it, and so talk about what happened, basically familiarize yourself what happened, try to explain it in terms that takes away the whatever grip it has on you, the grip of the trauma. And he says basically modern psychotherapy is terrible at dealing with trauma, especially trauma that's not just a single event, but like multiple events, based like PTSD or something that happens by being in constant war zone, or in a being abused as a kid or something. It's like what you have to do, or what he's proposing, is a more beautiful approach instead of hyper focusing on the event and reliving it by talking about it again and again and again, you need to bring it into context, a larger context. So for a returning war vet that has PTSD, you shouldn't necessarily be talking about the trauma that what happened to cause his trauma. He should be reintegrated back into the community. So this means eating with people. This means, and get choked up just thinking about it. This means getting back into life, in the fullest sense. So you go back to church, you sing together, you have meals, you participate in festivals,
it's communion based, like it's actually
right.
It's not just you flailing around in the darkness on your own, right?
Right, because there's a reciprocal narrowing that happens when you spiral down, where that becomes everything, and it frames the whole, everything in the world shrinks down into that.
Yeah.
And what he's saying is you have to basically open up the world again.
Mm-hmm.
And so not so that thing's minimized or disappears, it doesn't, but so that it can find its own place in the larger picture of things.
Right.
So their life has to sort of take on more in order for that thing to find its place, and then you could possibly talk about it if you need to, or so that's kind of the approach. And I mean, theoretically, that just sounds great to me. Like but it requires like a whole community. Like you don't have. And
what do you think that is doing for a person when you integrate them, instead of have them, ruminate over and over again on their trauma, but rather just have them become a part of a body?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that is telling them? I kind of know the answer, but I'm just wondering, because
what is that telling them?
What is that telling them?
I don't know. What do you think? I'm interested what you think.
I think it's telling them that they are loved and that they are valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's looking at the actual person, and not at the outside, like at the things that first meet our gaze, let's say, right?
Yeah.
When, like, I've had lots of strangers in my home, right, through the woofing program, and we sit down to the table after a hard day of work. Everybody's dirty and sweaty, and maybe a little injured. Right. and we eat together, and we don't know who we are. We don't know each other really. Mm-hmm. We only know what we can see, right? Mm-hmm. But when we sit together and eat together, we're saying that you're acceptable to me. Mm-hmm. I accept you, right? I love you in that sense, right? If I didn't, I wouldn't feed you. You mm-hmm. couldn't come to my table, right? And that's the beautiful, in my opinion, right? The beautiful sees the beautiful. Mm-hmm. And so when you give somebody that opportunity to feel like that, to feel like a part of something, they're in the beautiful. They're in it.
Right. That's that balance between multiplicity and unity.
Yes.
And well, it's not even a balance. The way multiplicity and unity happen is through love. Like love keeps everything right. together, and love also allows everything to be its own, just be its whatever it is.
That's why religio binds and not credo. There, I just said it. Right?
Well, credo's the truth portion. It's the whatever the truth portion is.
If we try,
it's not the beautiful portion.
But if I sat down with all those woofers and talked about their credos, we would very quickly find ourselves divided.
Right.
Very quickly.
Yep.
Like within seconds. probably.
Be like, oh, you think that?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Zing,
Yeah.
the wall goes up.
right. Okay, so
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
think all that is like an example of the right hand of God bringing someone back in. So that would be the gathering back in, and that's the process of healing. Now,
Mhm.
like with the example of like that's the war veteran who went out and then came back and needs to be reintegrated and needs healing. So
Yes. Yes.
Now we also have the guy in the basement that never left home. He needs to be pushed out,
Right.
and he needs to experience life, and he needs to, I don't want to be flippant, but he needs to have some trauma.
well, you know what? When you said the war veteran goes out and then when he comes back he needs healing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first thought I had was, well, we're all war veterans, like, right? Like we're living in a world that is malevolent, like, and Revelation talks about us as overcomers. So
Mm-hmm.
So the guy in the basement, he needs to get drafted, basically. Right? He needs to get out there and get involved in the war that is being itself. Mm-hmm. because we are overcomers. So mm-hmm. there is it's not a smooth road. If that's what we're called, if we're called overcomers, just think about the word. Mm-hmm. Overcoming, like, you've got to get around obstacles, you got to get over stuff, you got to work your way through it, right?
Mm-hmm. So so I think, like, what's the motivation of getting sent out? It's development, it's growing, it's becoming. So healing and development is how I like it. At least like I have it. Nice. And it also has to do with like like the bringing in is like theosis, going towards God, becoming more like Christ. And then the going away is almost like creation, like the diversity and
multiplicity.
Right. Like creation happens because of the pushing away.
Well, I like the example of the bicycle. I like the example of the bicycle there again, because let's say your going out trip is learning how to ride a bicycle. Okay, this is your going out, and you look at the bicycle and it's just a million things, isn't it? It's just a multiplicity of parts. It's a mystery to you. And like, yeah, and you have to learn how to overcome all those things, right? Like and once you do, you don't think of the bicycle anymore as a multiplicity, but you think about it as a unity, right? Mm-hmm. It's now a bicycle, and then you actually conform yourself to its image and become just like it. So yeah, that's what.
That's good. Okay, so now how about we move towards the book of Job?
Yeah, let's do it.
And like, what? So
get really controversial.
Yeah, because like what the hell is happening with Job? Because we like to say that Satan did this. No, God kind of orchestrated a lot of this. And like, what are we supposed to make of that? Because these are terrible things.
Yes.
And that's kind of the whole point, is because how do we even wrap our head around this? And there's something. Oh, what you got?
Just gonna close the door. Okay. Ignoring.
What is that little chime?
That's my phone.
Oh.
My landline. I'm an old bar, remember? I don't have a cell phone. have a landline.
Do you get cell phone coverage out there?
No.
Oh, so you don't even have the option.
No.
Okay. So I think with kind of the examples we're using, I think what's happening in the book of Job is a transformational process at play.
Mm-hmm.
I think Job is transforming. I think the community surrounding Job transforms also because of what he goes through. And I think I would say the world has a fundamental change in it. The world has fundamentally transformed from one place to another because of what happened with Job. I don't know. To put it kind of simply, the world before was Job was protected in the hedge of protection. And basically when he did good, he was rewarded for it. It paid off and he avoided evil. And he just prospered. Mm-hmm. And the question was that Satan posed was like, because God was like, look at how righteous he is. And Satan was like, yeah, but if he just likes you because you're in control of everything, because you protect him. And if you weren't in control of everything, he wouldn't like you at all. He wouldn't worship you. He would curse you. And God seems like eager. He's like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
Because it's true. Like if God's in control of everything and just protecting you and you're just sitting there in the house, in your basement.
Well, then you're the guy in the basement. Yeah.
Yeah. You're the guy in the basement. And the question is there something more there, both in Job, and does Job and God actually have a real connection? And so, the hedge of protection gets taken down. Job gets kicked out of the nest, so to speak, and basically suffers everything that a person could suffer.
Yeah.
So not only is he the best of men, the most righteous man, and that's why he's chosen to suffer, he also suffers everything that a person could suffer.
Everything.
Short of death. And through that, Job says even at the end, he's like, I heard of you before, but now I have seen you.
Right.
And so it's like Job got to see God through
the suffering.
In
the midst of the suffering.
Right. At the very bottom.
Yeah.
And he also got to experience everything a human could experience. He had the whole, before he was merciful to the poor, and he was a good guy. He would give to those that needed. He took care of people, but he never experienced what they experienced.
Yeah.
And so now he could identify with everyone.
Yeah, I know. I was just
the lowest of the low.
Whenever Job met someone who was in any kind of pain and suffering, I'm sure he said, I know how you feel.
Right. Right.
Because he actually did. Sorry, that's my dark humor.
but that's true.
Yeah, it is.
And kind of in a way, like, even if you were poor and suffering, you didn't suffer as much as Job did.
Yeah. And the thing is, Job is a type of Christ. So just think about that.
Well, that's,
so, go ahead.
Yeah, that's where we're heading. We're heading right to Christ.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I jumped the gun. But it's just
Come on, that was the big spoiler alert. We're talking about Jesus.
The thing is, when we are suffering, Christ is in the midst of it. Like he's there, he's right there, and he knows exactly what it feels like all the time, no matter what it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it gets into you know, I don't know how to, like, it has something to do with creation too, because this is the moment of creation where the whole world changes depending on whether Job curses God or not.
Well, yeah, see, this is like I've talked about this before, how Origen says that there's layers to the scriptures, right? And so you have this literal, this moral, ethical layer, and then a spiritual one. And I took that, like when Origen read the scripture, he looked at it like that, everything, okay.
Right.
And he could derive, like he could just plumb the depths of scripture. And I thought, well, what if you just did that with the book itself? Like just plunked it down, opened it up and said, and I found that the story of creation in Genesis, the story of Job, and the story of, in Revelation, what's unfolding in Revelation is the same story, but on those layers, So you've got the literal creation, the 6 days, 7 days, or whatever. Then you've got this moral, ethical creation, right? And I mean, what is creation? And then you got the spiritual one in Revelation. But what is creation? Creation, when Jesus died on the cross, he said, "It is finished." Meaning creation had just been finished, right? And John Bear uses the example of when Pilate said to Christ, "Behold the man, behold the human being," is what he said to Christ. In other words, that's when the human being was finished, right? And the story of in Genesis and the story in Job is both a kicking out of this perfect world and into the hardships of, the thorns, let's call them, and becoming something real.
Right. Because if you don't go out, you don't become anything.
Yeah.
And then also it resolves evil in a higher good.
Yes, it does.
It's the more complex good that results.
Now the problem that we end up with in both of these stories, like with the fall and the story of Job's suffering, which I think are the same story, just expressed differently, poetically, right? Is calling God evil, of falling into the trap of calling God evil, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the rock and the hard place that you find yourself in. And so how, like, I don't have an answer, but how do you reconcile that, right? Because like you said, it's caught up into the good, right? But it's still suffering, right? It's still pain. It's someone still has to endure, but so did Christ. So like,
right.
Yeah,
this is where we get to the limits of how this is the limits of thought and the limits of doctrine and the limits of our theology. We basically can build a framework that kind of says, this is kind of how it makes sense. But when it happens to you, all that goes out the window.
Yeah.
In a sense. And so then you're left with just your relationship with God.
Right.
And this is not to say like, oh, you should put on a happy face and have faith and no, like it should be like Job provides the example for us, and he
Well, just before you go on, I just want to say what has really started nagging at me lately was the fact that the tree in the garden was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this is what we're trying to figure out right now in this conversation.
Right.
Right? Like, it is not that cut and dry, honestly. It isn't. And it's just fascinating to me that's actually where you end up. Like, if you think about anything in any kind of depth, you end up wondering, you want to know, right? You want the knowledge of good and evil. You want to know what to call all this stuff that's going on. Yeah.
Well, and this kind of gets, that's exactly right. And we lose our trust in God because we don't think he's actually good. And we doubt that he actually loves us because of what's happened.
And let's go down this rabbit trail, because I think this is a really good one. And it's expressed so well in Job with the friends, right? The friends of Job. So the classic errors, when we are trying to decipher what the knowledge of good and evil is in our suffering, right? Because that's actually the only time we ever think about it. We don't think about it when everything's going well. We try to figure it out when it's not going well, right? So let's talk about, and you know more about this, so let's talk about the errors that Job's friends make, the assumptions that they make as they try to decipher good and evil.
Yeah, I think the main error that they make, so they have a doctrine, and it's basically the righteous are rewarded and the wicked are punished.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
And it's basically Dr. Garrett, who I watched his video series on Job. He calls it the doctrine of retribution. And it's basically the summation of all sort of ancient wisdom at the time. And even just like, it's just common, a lot of it's common sense. It's like, if you live a life stealing and robbing and committing violence, that stuff is going to come back onto your head and you're going to die. It's stuff like that. If you are lazy and a coward, you're going to starve.
It's consequent. It's kind of the law of consequences.
Right. And he even says, like, he's like, wisdom isn't concerned with right or wrong. It's almost just sort of like, it's just sort of like, this is just how things are. If you work hard, you'll reap a harvest. If you love your neighbors and treat them well, you'll be respected. And, like, this is just like, yes, of course. And so basically the righteous are rewarded, the wicked are punished. Now, in the case of Job, we know, because the narrator tells us, and then God at the end tells us, Job's not evil. In fact, he's the most righteous man.
Right.
And he's the one that suffers.
And he's being punished.
Right. And so Job and his friends all hold on to this wisdom. This is how Job has become successful, is because he's cared for people, and because he treats his workers well, and because he raised his family right. And he owes all his success to all this wisdom. So he's seen it work. And now all of a sudden it looks like he's being punished, and why? And so his friends make the mistake of reverse engineering. They're like, well, since you're being punished, it must be because you did some evil.
Right.
And so they
Okay, wait, stop for a
Yep.
minute. Because I just, okay, so I would say that at that point, the error is in calling it punishment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, now I might be spoiling your whole point again, but
No.
but
That's one of the errors. But how do you?
but what happened? What actually happens to Job? What does he consider the thing at the end? Like, what? How does he consider it? How does, when he looks back on it, what does he call it? I'm trying to remember if it's in the book of Job. I should look it up, but
what?
where he talks about being refined.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Because I would say, like you said, reverse engineering, like if you do, so this law of retribution is if you do evil, you'll be punished.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you're suffering, then we're going to immediately call that punishment, which equals you've done something evil, right? So
Yeah.
you have brought it down on yourself.
Right.
But in Job's case, the whole point of the story is that it looks like that, but it isn't that.
Right.
It is not that at all.
Right.
Right. And so what is it then? If it's not punishment, right, what is it? Right.
Right. Well, and this is what, and that's why Job is suffering. He's trying to figure out what's happened. And he gets to the point where he's like, I wish God would indict me on official charges, so at least I would know what it was.
Yeah.
And he even says like he would wear it as a crown.
Yeah.
That his, whatever his sin was, but, and his, so this is adding to Job's suffering. It's not like his friends and him are like really of different worldviews. They're the same type of people. And what's interesting is that, the first friend that responds to Job like cries out in this insane speech how he wants his entire life to be uncreated.
Right.
And it can be even said that he would rather just all of creation just not have been. Yeah. He's like, because he can't make sense of anything. Yeah. And so it's the cry of a baby. Yeah. A baby doesn't understand anything. It can just cry.
Yeah. Which is what I can imagine Adam and Eve thinking too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, like both of these stories, this mythology in the Bible are stories of humanity. And what is true for Adam and Eve and Job is true for all of humanity. That's what makes them so profound. Okay. We all have these moments where we don't know, where the world suddenly doesn't make any sense. Right. And it would have been better if it had never been created. Mm-hmm. I think.
Yeah. So Job.
Go ahead.
Well, Job says this, and his friends are already shocked by everything that happened, because everything happened at once. His kids die, all of his wealth is stolen and burned, and like it's not coincidence at all. Like in these, they don't have like a naive view that like, oh, your house caught on fire, you must have done something wrong. They're like, they're like, no, this had to be an act of God because of everything that happened, and you're totally desolated. And so they start by, the first friend starts talking, pretty gently with him, but confesses to him that he had a vision. He says, I had a vision at night, and this ghostly form came to me and said, who is righteous before God? And so now this is the basic framework of his friends. And I think this is the fundamental difference between his friends Job and his friends. His friends are afraid of God because they don't know what he's doing. They just know that you better do right and don't do wrong, or else you'll
So
get
there, which is, hang on, I gotta close this blind. It's blinding me.
You're glowing like an angel.
I know, right? Oh man.
So they're actually fearful of God, and like in not a good way, where they don't I don't think they trust God. Job trusts God, and he's just so confused.
Okay, so that gets me back to this idea of the mechanical God and the way that Job's friends perceive God, right? And how that is really a mechanical God, because if you think about it, whatever they do controls the God. So who's in control? The God or them?
Well, yeah, and even in their speeches, you can get a sense of how they talk through Job towards this mechanical God. They're not, in some parts, they're not talking to Job. They're trying to placate this God that they're afraid is going to do what happened to Job.
Because they're actually literally sitting next to the guy who's getting cursed. Okay,
right? They're like, I'm not taking your side. You are, you got bad juju going on.
Exactly. Like, you're really close to me, and the lightning could strike both of us, right?
Right.
So, I'm going to say all the magic words. Because that's what it is. Okay, it's incantation. Like I'm really trying to distill this down to better understand what the mechanism is. In the way that they're doing this.
They're giving Sunday school answers.
Well, they're saying the magic words. They're saying incantations, right? And they're controlling the God.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And Job's sitting there and he's not buying it from his friends, but he still has to deal with this uncontrollable God. And that's, I think, why God comes in a whirlwind. Right? He's not a controllable God.
Yeah. Like like wind and spirit are the same thing, and God comes in this whirlwind of a storm. You're just like, it's like too much spirit.
Well, the whirlwind is the most uncontrollable little thing. We call them dust devils, when they're small, right? Like it just seems to boogie around with no rhyme or reason, like I remember once one went through in Northern Ontario where I lived, and it was just so weird how, it like wiped out a bunch of houses, then crossed the road, and then wiped out a bunch of trees, and then went up the highway and crossed over. It was just like, it feels like a hand of God thing.
Yeah.
Like that something's picked out for destruction.
Right.
Because it's completely arbitrary, right? It's not like a hurricane where everything that's in its path just gone.
Well, that's part of what probably terrifies the friends, is because like they saw that Job was a good man, and they're being good and wise men too, and this arbitrary thing happens. They're like, what is going on? And so they start this sort of placation towards God, and Job accuses them of this, and Job just continues his, Job's confusing for people and it is confusing because the way he talks, you're like, people want to, the reader will do this. You'll be like, Job is saying things about God that I wouldn't dare say, because I'm afraid that that's like sinning to be able to say those things.
But the only reason that fear enters in is because all of your assumptions, all of your presuppositions about God are wrong.
Right. But there's a boldness to Job where he's like, I have nothing to lose, so I'm going to try to just talk to God.
Figure this out. Figure it out.
And God answers him. And but I do want to, his friends, in their desire to stick to doctrine and keep their world together, because Job's kind of blowing their world apart if what he's saying is true. So they're like, no, Job, you're wrong. You've done evil. Look, just repent and the Lord will restore you. He's kind and gracious and full of love towards you, but don't be hard-hearted and don't say these things. Like, just repent. Like, that's kind of what they're doing. But by the end, they're totally abusing him and accusing him of being basically the most rotten, evil man who everything he did was ill-gotten. He abused everyone along the way. He stole everything. Yeah, nothing that he did, everything's an illusion. So like, they go from like sitting with him silently to answering him gently to just ramping up to where they're basically Job is evil incarnate.
Yeah. And so why do you think they do that? Like,
well, so beauty, goodness, truth, the goodness part, like the downside of the goodness part is sort of the irascible. And you'll see this in the desire to cleave good from evil. You want a clean division, and that leads to violence if it's not. So that's exactly what happens to his friends. Yeah, they want to figure out what's evil, what's good, and Job is definitely not good. So he's evil. And this happens to Christ.
Yeah. Well, this is also the knowledge of good and evil, the seeking of the knowledge of good and evil, right? This is what it is. And like this just become really clear to me recently. I don't know why I never thought about it before. I just thought about the tree as the thing that you weren't supposed to touch. But then I realized, well, wait a minute, no, this is what we're always doing. We're always trying to figure out what's good and what's evil. And this is why in my conversation with Nate and Jed and Michael a while ago there, I said, well, what if I don't call that evil? What if the thing that looks evil, what if I decide not to call it that? Well, it is. You can't call it good. But then I said, but I'm not calling it good. I'm just not calling it.
Yeah,
I'm just not calling it. Right. So and that continues to plague me, actually, that question, because, and then in light of what's going on in the book of Job, like you said, they want to, I like the word you use, cleave, like just, kind of like chop asunder good and evil. Like they want it made distinct, right? They want it easily graspable. That's what they want. Yep. And God doesn't make it easily graspable. And we all know that some good leads to evil and some evil leads to good. We know that.
Well, right? And to, like, the friends were following basically like proverbial wisdom. They're not saying anything outrageous. They're not necessarily zealots of any kind, but because this is like, they didn't have eyes to see what was going on. Yeah. They fundamentally didn't understand what God was up to. And this led them down this road by sticking with their doctrine, by sticking with their rules. Distinction. And this is the thing, like in a transformational process, when things are changing, the old rules don't apply. Yeah. And the old rules are right. That's the thing. They're right, but they have a limit. And this is the whole point. There's a wisdom. So that's like the wisdom of man, or let's just say it can even be the wisdom that God's enabled us to understand. But God at the end is,
you could call it common sense too.
But taken to the extreme, or I mean, what God is trying to say is that there's a wisdom higher than that. Mm-hmm. And he does this by referencing nature, and God brings up the ostrich, and Dr. Garrett does this in the lecture series, which is so good. He's like, look at the ostrich. Look how foolish it is. It leaves its eggs on the ground. It doesn't care about its young, but it's not afraid. and just look at it run. Look how fast look at the glory that it displays. It doesn't have wisdom, yet it thrives. How is that? What rules is the ostrich living by? There's other things going on other than this doctrine of retribution. There's creatures out there. There's things
But
happening.
we should know by now in this age of science, the age of science that we live in, we should know by now that the ostrich is part of a very huge organism, right, called nature. And that it's a balance. We talk about the balance of nature. Everybody, thinks it's like this, two things that are balancing, but no, it's a net, right? It's woven. It's mycelium. Yeah. It's mycelium, right? And I don't even think you can. I don't even think science has even like the half of it,
well,
in that sense.
Yeah, and now we're moving. God's moving Job into the realm of the beautiful,
right?
Because we can sense beauty. It's even like the sense of meaning and stuff like that Peterson talks about. I think it's in the realm of the beautiful. So we have a sense for the beautiful, and how I was saying that. Like a PTSD sufferer needs to be brought into a larger picture in a larger community in order to find a place for. That's what God's doing with Job.
Yeah.
So Job's gotten hyper fixated on this question about justice, where he's like, indict me, God. Indict me. And God doesn't say anything about justice. He doesn't say anything about it. He's like, look at everything.
Yeah. And when you do that, what do you see? You see mercy. That's what you see, actually.
How do you see mercy?
Well, because everything is accounted for. Like when we say the verse, God sees even the little sparrow fall, it's not untrue, because everything matters.
Yep.
Right? And so to me, that is the difference between justice and mercy. But justice wants to cleave asunder, right? It wants to make right and wrong graspable. It needs to assign blame. It needs to find a way to call something evil or call something good. That's what justice needs to do. And mercy is that centripetal force, of drawing in and healing, right? But that healing is, like it's not done. We're not individuals. We are, but we aren't. Like, it's just the unity and multiplicity again, right? Like we end up, the healing is found in communion, right? What you said in the beginning. And when we know that we are part of this whole, then we find healing, then we find our place, then we know that we're valuable, we know that we have meaning, right? We find the meaning in our lives. So and
just like you
that's
can
what mercy
sense,
is. That's what mercy is to me. That's how I would define mercy, because mercy is actually healing. The word in Greek means olive oil, which is used to heal wounds. Okay, so that's what mercy is, a healing. And what is a healing? Like when you cut yourself on your skin, you have cleaved asunder the thing that was a hole. And what happens with healing? It reconciles itself.
Yep.
That's what it does.
That's right. And, God is trying to heal Job from what happened. So this whole thing, and the way he's doing it is he's bringing Job into the bigger picture of creation. He's like, you don't understand any of this stuff, but you can see it. And you don't understand what's happening to you, but can you see what I'm doing? And that's when you have to, that's when Job has to trust God or not, and he does. And what's amazing is Job is satisfied by this. He's like, and
he's satisfied in his own unknowing, though. Like, he doesn't really know, right?
Right. He
In the end.
Yeah, he doesn't have a new set of rules or a new doctrine. What he has is he saw God and he trusts him.
Right. And he knows that he can't know. Like,
right.
He's resting in the knowledge that this is greater than he is. This is greater than his own understanding, but God is good. Right?
God is doing something good.
God, yeah. And that it's not just about me and my suffering, although my suffering matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about me and my suffering. It's about everything. That's the good. That's the beautiful. And that's also the true.
Right. Right. But that gets us out of our frameworks. So we always get locked into our frame.
Yeah.
And the reason why we get locked in our frame is because it works and it's true on some level. It's not like a lie, but all frameworks,
all of these things it's fractal.
All frameworks have to go at some point. There'll be something that happens that doesn't make sense. And then that begins a transformational process. And that's how things become more.
Well, see, this is the thing. If it's fractal, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be the spiral dynamic. It's going to be the spiraling dynamic motion, which has what? Centrifugal and centripetal force, or centripetal force, right? Like that's the nature of that beast, of that reality, right? That it's fractal. So we will see this pattern. Now I feel like Jonathan Pajot,
It's a fractal
we'll
pattern.
see this pattern everywhere.
Yep. It's the cruciform. It's the cruciform pattern in nature, in all of creation.
Yeah.
And that's the real truth at the bottom of everything is that what happened to Job is an image of Christ. It's an icon of Christ. And Christ is the foundation of creation.
Yes.
And
it's where the human being was finished. It is finished, right?
And something new is also happening too through Christ. It's both finished and new.
Right.
Dr. Garrett.
Well, yeah, because now it's finished. Because I mean, when you're working on a work of art and it isn't finished, it's nothing. And then when it's done, you've created a new work of art. Right? It's new. It's finished and new at the same time.
Right. Dr. Garrett pointed out in Job, you have this pattern. You have Job friend 1, then Job friend 2, Job friend 3, and then it goes Job friend 1, Job friend 2, Job. Then friend 3 doesn't answer back again. And he was making a comment. He's like, it's common in Hebrew poetry to establish a pattern and then you break it at the end.
Oh, nice.
And that signals that that's the end of the pattern.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, the end of a pattern is death. And then you have the birth of something else. You have something else happening.
And then that's where God speaks.
Right. Then you're at least in a transformational process, and there's no way to understand that when you're in it.
No.
Like you don't understand, like the baby goes through a transformational process. The baby's born. Baby has no idea what's going on. Just there's this, and I think it's the same with us whenever we go through that, when we go through death.
Well, we have a lake on our property, and when we first bought this place, it was a swamp meadow, which is a common feature in the Chilcotin because it's fairly dry here. And because of various factors, it started to fill up because it's a low spot and it's naturally wet.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually was bottom fed as well from a few springs somewhere, because we're at the bottom of a big slope on the other side. And anyway, so fires went through and then they clear cut logged a whole huge area back there. And now that that's happened, there's no grown trees anymore, right? So now our swamp meadow has turned into a lake. And I was back there one day looking at it, and this thought flipped past my mind. This is what transformation looks like. And it's not pleasant, because there are trees standing in the water and they're all sideways. And, what was a little wetland that I could walk around, and it was full of birds, and all kinds of things were happening in there because it had been established for so long. That's all gone because it's constantly changing, right? The water's getting higher and higher and moving out, and trees are being absorbed into this lake, and they're dying. And so you've got this outer circle of death, right? Of dead trees everywhere.
Yep.
And now they're falling over, and they're landing on the path that I used to walk around the thing on. So the path is no longer, you can't traverse around it anymore easily. And it's kind of devastating, like,
right.
And I thought, well, this is what transformation looks like. Now it's going to be a lake. At some point, it's going to be beautiful. But until that happens, it's not beautiful. It isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, to the eye.
Yeah, it's like the park by my house. They dug up the whole park and destroyed it and tore down trees and stuff. And it's already starting to look better. They're laying the new sidewalks and like all this stuff. But I'm just like, I didn't like seeing all those trees getting tore down and like all that heavy equipment there. That was like the park we played in. And at least that's my hope. It looks better. Seems like it's going to be better. But but that's the U-shaped journey. Like things get worse before they get better, kind of thing. And I mean, if you go around here, I'm in Kansas, so like we went to a friend's farm and they have a stream and there's all this shale, but you can just look through the shale and like find little fossils of like little snails and stuff, because all this used to be low, like shallow ocean.
Oh wow.
Back, who knows how long ago.
Yeah.
But like talk about just transformation being sort of, it's just in the earth. And that's that cruciform shape, is the U-shaped journey that's kind of in everything. And somehow that's how God gets things to be made real. And that's just what he's doing.
Yeah. We didn't really get into the left and right hand of God, in particular, let's say. We did, but we didn't in particular.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of talk about left and right hand, or, even the disciples are like that, are we going to sit at your right hand? And then there's the proverbial sheep and the goat situation, right? That has always fascinated me, because I have had both animals, sheep and goats longer than sheep. And the goats are sent away, and the sheep are gathered in, right? And the thing I know about sheep is that sheep follow, right? They fall in love with the shepherd. They do. They literally, like when they look at you, it's like, okay, stop. It's just way too much affection. They just look at you like, oh, I love you, like just too much.
No.
And then there's goats. Then you've got the goats, and they're just like super independent. They'll kind of give you a quick bonding glance that says, yeah, all right, we'll be friends. As
On
long as
my
you
terms.
Yeah, on my terms. Yes, everything is on their terms. Yes, exactly. and they're just there's such a good animal to describe people who have not actually made that U-shaped journey yet, or haven't
Mm-hmm.
been made new, right? So that
Right.
they fall in love with the shepherd. Like they go, oh, you know what? It's like I was saying at the beginning, when you've been at the bottom, like the David Goggins guy, what the resurrection is so much more powerful because you know that going back means death
Mm-hmm.
to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the goat needs to learn, like if you don't follow me, you're gonna die.
Have you ever
And they
seen a
go,
goat go through
whatever.
have you ever seen a goat go through a transformational process and become a
I
sheep?
have actually, and it always
Really?
includes near death. Yes.
Really?
So I've had goats get really, really sick, and I've had to nurse them back. And after that, my relationship to them is completely different.
Oh, really?
Much more loving, much more submissive, much more,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
Like I can
interesting.
call them and they come, and yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to mention that because I know that in some ideologies, it's used as a way to describe the God that Job's friends describe to Job,
Mm-hmm.
right? That story of the sheep and the goats. And I always found it very difficult to imagine that God would send goats to hell. Because I really like goats. I happen to be a little goaty myself.
Right. If they go, I go.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And the way, there's a way in which you could talk about that. You'd be like, just as the friends were talking about, the righteous and the wicked.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that in society, and you have to make sure wicked people aren't hurting people and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
it's very problematic, and it's not really easy to do, but it's something that's true and needs to be done. But then there's a higher wisdom at play. That's the whole point, is like that framework has a limit, and to project it into eternity,
that's where the mistake happens.
Is an error. It's a fundamental error, because to assume that that's where the lines of eternity are drawn, I think it just fundamentally at least misses the point of Job.
Yeah. Well, and where does God land the plane with Job? Where does Job land the plane with God? In unknowing. Right?
Yeah, but we end with this imagery of God being like, yeah, Leviathan is terrible and you don't want to mess with him, but I'm not worried about him.
Yeah.
And he's like, and there's like subtle hints through there, is like Job, you've overcome that. And that's what we see through Christ. Christ overcomes death and evil by taking it up into himself. Like he overcomes, he tricks death, he tricks evil into doing good. Like that's the whole point. And so to think that that we can project just sort of like that good evil division into eternity, I think it's well beyond the scope of our vision. And in fact, when I think about the beautiful, and when I think about everything finding its place and working together, it's got to be something better. But I don't understand it, and I don't want to be, some people are just like, oh, everything will just work out. It's like, no, not everything works out. Hell is real. It's just not eternal.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
That's my rant.
Yeah. Well, that was good.
I mean, we did get into like the left-hand stuff because it really has to do with suffering and
No, we did.
how
We
we
did.
perceive
I
evil.
just wanted to
We
make
just
that
didn't
point
do
about
it.
the sheep and the goats.
No, that was a good point. And I like your
Because-
transformational goat after the near-death experience.
It's true. It's true.
Oh, I do want to,
Yeah.
maybe this, I'll say this to finish up. Like, there, what was I going to say? There was one thing, there were two things. I remember the second thing. Anyway, first of all, there's tradition that sort of says that Job never was like fully healed from his affliction, like his health.
Okay.
That he suffered from that like his whole life. So there's something about the righteous sufferer just continued to suffer in a way, although he was restored. But and also at the end of Job, he becomes, well, while he's going through this, he's very much a prophetic figure, I think.
Yeah.
So he talks like a prophet in ways. And then at the end he becomes priest. He makes the sacrifices. He becomes a mediator between God and his friends.
Yeah.
And then he also becomes king, which everyone brings him gold and like from around the area, like everyone saw what happened.
Yeah.
And heard about it, and then they brought him gold. So he's prophet, priest, and king at the end.
And he made sacrifices for his friends too, right?
Yep, that's the priest part.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
he becomes mediator. And then at the very end, that names his three daughters. And his first daughter is named, the translation is Day. Then the second daughter is named something like cinnamon, like something sweet smelling, but it's also was used for medicinal purposes, like if you have like constant upset stomach or so there's this idea of like he's now seen the light of day. He's now comforted with a sweet smelling aroma and for his affliction. And then his third daughter is named, I can't remember the name, but it's something like box of mascara, but it's actually like a type of makeup that was made from seaweed.
Oh, seaweed.
It was made from seaweed, and then they started making it from like this ground up mineral. But I like the seaweed because it works better. Because like the seaweed would be available like after a big storm, the storm would rip up seaweed from the ocean floor, and then it would wash ashore, and so then you could gather it, and then you would I don't know what the process was, you grind it up and I think burn it or something, but it was like it's mascara, it's eye makeup, but it's like beauty from ashes.
Right.
And so you have this wonderful imagery or wonderful naming at the end. It's sort of like light, fragrance, comfort, and beauty from ashes. So
beautiful.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shari.
Thanks, Jess.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.